requesting you to monitor both the places and see if as and when question comes in, you can find time to appropriately address them. Thank you very much. All right, let's get going. I think there's still a few people joining in, but since all the sessions are recorded, the replay is available. Even if you're missing some portions of the session, you can always replay it as well. All right, with that, once again, good afternoon, everyone. Hope all of you are having a great Reconnect conference so far. And welcome, and thank you for joining the session on position management. And just so that I reiterate regarding any of the questions, please try to post them in the Zoom chat window. If you're not connected on Zoom and watching the session via the Portable app, you can post the questions there too. I'll try to monitor both these places and address the questions as they come in or at appropriate checkpoints during the sessions. With that, let's get started. I hope all of you are able to see my screen share as well. All right, so let me get this going. Excellent. My name is Logesh Balasubramaniam. I am the Managing Director at PeopleSoft Consulting and manage their PeopleSoft HCM and HR technology practice. I have been consulting with PeopleSoft application and leading PeopleSoft projects for over 17 years now, and core HRMS and technology areas are my key focus areas, and this topic, position management, is one of my favorite ones. And it's been so many years where PeopleSoft has had a position management functionalities that have been very solid. Over the last few years, there have been some significant improvements to the module as well. However, the reason for having this as a session today is even this year, there's been a lot of activity in our customer base around position management. Customers looking to implement position management who are not currently using it, brand new implementations starting with position management, things like that. So always an area that has a lot of questions from our customer base and interest. So thought it would be a great use sharing a lot of that information with a broader user group over here. So that's the reason behind the session. You have my contact information in the slide, and if you have any questions beyond this session, feel free to reach out as well. Before we get started, a brief introduction about who we are and what we do. PeopleSoft Consulting, we are an Oracle Platinum partner. We are headquartered in Bay Area since 2004, and we have consultants, clients, and offices across the states and Canada as well. We are an organization that is entirely focused on PeopleSoft. So PeopleSoft applications is all we do. We support all product pillars across all the industries and offer services that any PeopleSoft customer would need. All the services for PeopleSoft customers is our key focus areas. Specifically, a couple of items I want to call out here. Emerging technologies for PeopleSoft, things like Kibana Analytics, chatbots, PeopleSoft Test Framework. All those items are our specializations. We spend most of our project these days on the latest functionalities out there. And in this conference, we have multiple sessions. Me and my colleagues are presenting over the next couple of days. So feel free to check out those items if that's of your interest as well. You would have also noticed around the Oracle learning space, Oracle guided learning functionality is a feature that as PMC we are partnering with Oracle team and deploying Oracle guided learning for PeopleSoft customers as well. So that's the key area of our specialization as well. So all of this information is in the slide decks for you to refer, so I will not spend a lot of time on that. With that said, let's get into the agenda for the session today. I want it to be a session that is fairly focused on concepts and functionalities and answer questions about why and how and what are the best ways to go about position management. I did have a plan to spend a time in the system showing some of the functions as well. I moved it to a later part of the session just so that we have enough time to cover the core concepts and address the more business and process related questions before we get into seeing things in the system. As I mentioned before, position management has been around for a long time. It's not not a new feature that was out, but there have been some great enhancements recently. But the focus of the session today is around how to get the best value of position management. How can you deploy it and modernize your data maintenance when it comes to employee data? That's the focus of the session. All right. With that said, let me get started. For people who are completely new to this topic around position management, PeopleSoft has a comprehensive position management functionalities. The reason I want to iterate this is we still have customers who come to us to understand does PeopleSoft have position management? Is it a separate module? Some of those basic items, right? So PeopleSoft Position Management is part of Core HR. So it's not an additional module that you license. If you have Core HR module, then you can use Position Management. Now, Position Management is basically an alternative way or an additional way of how you can define and manage your HR system. And for all customers would be familiar with managing your employee data using your job data. So all the attributes of a person's job, whatever they do, where they do it, all of that is tied to a person's job record. Now, obviously, the disadvantages with that is all that information is tied to a person, and when the person leaves, that information pretty much sticks to that person. When you have another person, you sort of need to re-enter and maintain all of that information. There is no linkage between the person who left and the person who have come in, and the history associated with that headcount, right? So that's where position management comes in. It's all about defining all the attributes of a job, or the terminology I keep referring to is attributes of a headcount in your organization, and keeping that separated out of employees, individual people. And that keeping them out is the purpose of position. A position is an entity that you define in the system that is a holder for all this information about what that position does, what the people in that position will do, and where they do it, all of those attributes. So essentially a good way to say, put it is, it's like defining a chair. A position is a chair, and you move people in and out of the chair, in and out of the position on your job data. So defining those empty chairs is all about position management. So we'll see what are the benefits of doing that, how to do it right, etc. And I'm assuming all of you, most of your PeopleSoft customers in here, pretty much all of you, you already use either the HR system without position management, or some might be using with position management. Transitioning from what you currently do to a full-blown position management is ideally what you are here for or what you want to listen. So that's the process we are going to talk about. So with that said, in terms of position management, where does it help? So the first important thing is, basically helps you maintaining your headcounts, or what we call as the chairs, right? How many chairs are in your organization? What is your headcount? What is the approved headcount? What are the headcounts, or what are the positions that are vacant and yet to be filled or in the process of filling, etc. When you don't use position management, all of this information is hard to track because you are relying on your employee job data and your active headcount. If you have a position that is approved and not yet filled, then it is not easy to report that information. Of course, you can use your recruiting system to look for vacancies that are advertised, but there are gaps in the process where you might have an approved budget, but it's not advertised as a vacancy, so that information is not easy to track. So one of the main reasons we hear customers looking for position management is to bridge that gap. Essentially, have this placeholder, have this position, track whether it is approved, track whether it is vacant, track whether it is filled or in the process of filling, all those items. So you have this empty chair that is always reportable. Right? That information is the key for starting to use position management. Now, And the biggest benefit when it comes to using position management is when there are a lot of attributes that are maintained at the position level rather than at an employee level. So basic things like what department, what location, whether it is a full-time part-time, whether it is a regular temporary, all of that information that defines a job when you use position management is going to be defined at a position. So when you want to make changes to any of those items, you don't update the employee job directly, but you update the position to which the employee belongs. And the position indirectly then updates the job data. So that automatic update of employee job data via the update incumbent process is one of the key features of position management, so that you don't have to duplicate data entry, right? Both at the position level and at the job level. Now, where this also comes in handy is when you have a position and when you have more than one people in it, then updating the position will update all the incumbents in it, meaning there is potentially a less workload for you to individually update employees in the position. Now, having more than one people in the position itself is a topic on its own, where it is good to have it, where it is not good to have it. So we'll talk about some of those as well, but it is definitely possible, and in some case, it is a good practice to have more than one person in a position where it is absolutely meaningful. So we'll see where those options are, right? And when it comes to um, minor items, like you can maintain a different position title compared to a job code description. One of the pain points that I hear from many HR customers, like job codes need to be very generic. There are customers I know who create a job code for every person, which is probably the extreme end. You should not be doing it. But there are customers who have a very refined list of job codes, but also struggle in terms of providing a variation with various jobs that happen. So position is sort of in between and helps you have um, multiple different variations of job titles when it comes to assigning it to employees. So a good example is you could have a job code that says that's an assistant or an office assistant or a staff assistant or an executive assistant, but you could have multiple positions. The same administrative assistant in the finance department might be a finance assistant, there might be a HR assistant, there might be a security assistant. So the same job that is being done by different departments have their own position. So gives you an additional layer of distinguishing the different jobs being performed in different departments. And as delivered, the position management is fully baked into the other PeopleSoft modules like recruiting, budget, and succession, performance, all these modules, profile management. As you, once you start using position management in core HR, then all the other modules can leverage it. It is also integrated into the core HR functionalities like your company directory, org structure, etc. There is an ability to view empty positions in those modules as well. And one of the very interesting feature about positions is the dotted line reporting. So when you don't use position management, when you're going by employee job data, you typically tie an employee to one supervisor using your supervisor ID field on job data. But when you use position management, you can tie an employee to a position, a reporting position. So a position reports to another position. And you can also have an indirect report, like a dotted line report, so showing that this position also functionally reports to another person of the position. Provides you a little bit more flexibility. We had a customer recently where they had a need for multiple reporting managers, 4-5 different manager options. Of course, there are various ways to address that particular requirement, but at least position management gives you an ability to record more than one direct line manager in the system. Okay, so that's an ability to do that. So that's one of the benefits as well. So the key ideas here, these are some of the aspects that I would consider drivers for start using position management. So if you have any of these requirements or if you have pain points in any of these areas, that's when you start considering position management, right? That's what I wanted to start with in terms of where position management is going to come in handy. spoke a lot about maintaining employee data in different places, right? And this slide is sort of like a cheat sheet for me to explain it, what is maintained where, right? When you don't use position data, there is only job data and job code, which is a fundamental system configuration element. So majority of the information about what the job does sits within a job code and gets defaulted to an employee's job data when you hire a person or a transfer, promote a person, right? When you introduce position, what we are essentially doing is we are taking a job code, we are putting the job code in a particular organization, a particular department location, and associating the attributes of the job code and adding additional data. For example, a good example I always use is the administrative assistant example. Take the administrative assistant job code, put it in a finance department, you associate which business unit, company, department, etc., that where the person is going to work. It would be a finance administrative assistant, who they report to, whether it's full-time, part-time, regular time, all those details are maintained at the position level. Then on employee job data, you basically assign that position to a person, where all of that information in the position is going to be defaulted into job data. And by default, they're not going to be editable, meaning if you need to change any of that information, you should update the position. You should not directly update job data. In addition to that, on your job data, you would have fields such as your establishment, employee class, EEO class, salary details, and payroll benefits detail. All that is individual basis, and those are maintained at the employee job level. So the distinction between job code, position, and employee job is key to understand what is going to be controlled by position management. So in that table that is shown on the slide here, the center portion that calls about the attributes that are maintained in the position. Those are the attributes that will be controlled by your position when you implement position management. So one of the big changes that a customer would see is when you implement position management is right now, all of your employment data changes are happening in your job data. You have a list of actions and reasons that are valid for your organizations. You do all of that on the employee job data directly. What will change when you do position management is all of the changes that you do in job data that are related to the data elements in the middle column controlled by position will not directly happen on job data, will instead be happening on position data. So for example, what I mean by that is, let's say you have a position who is reporting to, let's say we have a finance accountant position reporting to finance manager. Now, if you want that position to report to finance senior manager, you won't touch the employee who in that position, but you would basically update the position to say, instead of reporting to the finance manager, make this position reports to a finance senior manager. So it's you're basically updating the position rather than the employee data. Same with any of the elements. Let's say a position is becoming from a full-time to part-time, or you're moving from one location to another, you basically change the position. Only when you have multiple incumbents in a position and only one of the incumbent is changing, that's when you need to look at splitting the position potentially, right? So what the fundamental change that happens when you implement position management is where you maintain those changes and what action reasons you use. So that's a key area that changes. So we'll talk about some of that as part of the implementation process. But understand that all the elements called out in that middle section under the position column is where what is being controlled by positions. So one of the fundamental things, if you're not using position management and if you're thinking, is position management going to be good for you, then the first thing to think about is the nature of your organization and whether it's going to be a suitable option to do position management. The reason we say that is if you're already using the application without position management, you know the system is working as it is designed to. By introducing position management, you are introducing a new data element that you need to maintain, right? When you do that, you are actually adding more work to you. you are creating, in addition to job code and employee job data, you need to create and maintain positions. So when is it okay to have that additional work of maintaining position? Is you don't have to continuously keep on updating it. Right? That's the fundamental thing. So if your organization is going through a lot of changes, you are doing reorgs all the time, you're doing mergers and acquisitions, you're consistently changing your org structure and doing bulk updates of employee data, then position management is not probably a great option because you will continuously be updating those positions all the time, right? If your organization is fairly stable and have an established structure that you move people in and out, of course, you are going to be hiring people, you're going to be terminating people, promotions, transfers, all those are fine. But you are not fundamentally changing the structures every now and then. You are not doing reorgs all the time, things like that, where position management will be much more easy to implement and maintain. You won't feel the burden of managing positions in that scenario. So position management helps where you don't have a lot of fluidity around employee headcounts and job data, right? However, there also could be a scenario where a portion of your organization is always changing, but remaining part is always static or vice versa. So in those scenarios, you could do position management partially in your organization as well. So that's where the two types of position management comes into play: full position management and partial position management. Now, full position management, this is basically a system setting. We can enable position management in those two modes, whether we call it full or partial. The full mode has its benefits, but also is very strictly enforced, right? That's why it's called full position management. Every single employment will need to be attached to a position. So every single employee job record, including their history, will need to be attached to a position. So not something that we would highly recommend to customers who want to pilot out position management or who wants to convert to position management who are already running PeopleSoft. Full position management makes sense if we do it when we are newly implementing PeopleSoft, or the organization structure is fairly static that we think it is possible to easily implement and maintain full position management. Partial position management is essentially a hybrid where you can have either half or most of your employees in position and remaining without position, or vice versa. You can pick and choose which part of your organization should be controlled by position or not. Even for customers who think all of their employees can be in a position, we could still do partial position management and have every employee in a position. That's also an option. So partial position management is the most flexible option out there. And I think I already covered some of these pros and cons already. Full position management is very restrictive overall. And unless an organization absolutely need it, we wouldn't highly recommend it. Partial position management is the one that is more flexible and provides you the best of both worlds, essentially. However, the drawback about partial position management is system does not enforce that everyone should be in a position. So if you accidentally don't put a person in a position, then that person will not be in a position. However, there are various ways to overcome that, where you could, when a person is not in a position, means they're probably not in the reporting hierarchy at all. So their information will be missed out in various things. So you can easily include them, have reports to identify that, and also make it a process to make sure position is entered on job data, even with partial position management. So for organizations that we are not implementing PeopleSoft from scratch, highly recommend partial position management. Now, for customers who were using position management or continuing to use position management, in the last, almost 2 years now, there was this major upgrade to position functionality, what we call as fluid position management. Now, there is a misnomer out there that since the word fluid is used, it's basically just a user interface change when it comes to doing position management. But that's not the case. A fluid position management is a significant update to position management functionality altogether. What I mean by that is various drawbacks, or I would say constraints that were there with the classical way of position management were addressed with this fluid position management. What I mean by that is uh, just like job code, positions were maintained by admins. Admins have to create the positions. They will have to just maintain it exactly like job code. But what fluid position management did was it sort of distributed that activity around creating a position to a broader audience. So what it did was you now have an ability to request positions, make it go through an approval process, get it approved before a position becomes active and before used by HR team. So what it does is it allows you to broaden the base of who can request the positions. It could be your HR business partners. In some organization, we have actually deployed it to managers where managers can request a new position. So you can broaden the base of who should be able to request it. Since there is a workflow approval involved now, it can go through the various internal approvals that are needed. You can tag it to a budgetary approval process where when you're trying to create a new position or a headcount, it goes to all the different departments that need to prepare for that headcount before it is active and can be filled by through recruitment, right? So that whole process was sort of streamlined by the introduction of fluid position management. There is now ability to add supporting documents. And one of the other important things is effective sequencing that was introduced. So effective sequencing has always been there on job data. When you have employee's job and when there are multiple actions happening on the same day, you can sequence it into multiple rows where it allows you to granularly report what all happened to the particular employment record on any given day. But position data on the classical pages didn't have an effective sequence. So for example, if a position had multiple data changes, let's say it moved from temporary to regular to temporary or full-time to part-time, also change your location. If it all of them happened on the same day, then you only have one update row on the position. But now with the fluid position management, you can sequence it just like you do it on job data. So it helps with the reporting and helps to split out the data entry as well. So these are the different things that were introduced with fluid position management. The reason I want to call out this here is end of this year, December 31st, 2021, the classic position management is going out of support. Fluid position management will be supported is the only thing that's supported going forward. What it means is that there are not going to be any new features added to the classic position management pages. So if you're using position management already, then it is absolutely time for you to start using the fluid position management. And when you think about fluid position management, it is not just a user interface change. There is a lot more to it, a lot more functionalities introduced as part of fluid position management. One other important feature that came about with fluid position management, but a couple of images later, is that relies on fluid position management is something called as multiple incumbents management or incumbent management. Now, this is always a hot topic when it comes to position management. What is right how to handle multiple incumbents, right? So even with classic position management, you could always have multiple headcounts in the position. You can assign it to multiple people, and there could be multiple people associated with the position. However, what was not available earlier was when you have more than one person in a position, you couldn't identify who was the primary incumbent of that position. Now, what it meant was when you didn't have a capability to identify primary incumbent on a position, when you have multiple incumbents in a manager level position, you had complications where who should the system send any approvals to when you use functionalities like performance management, profile management, absence management. When it relies on a position supervisor, a position incumbent to approve, it would be sending it to both people in a position when you have more than one person, right? So this primary incumbent allowed customers to choose a primary person in that position as an incumbent. So workflow approvals and other reporting can rely on that primary person. Where this comes in handy is when you have multiple incumbents on a manager level position. When you typically have multiple incumbents on a non-managerial position, individual positions, right, then potentially there isn't a need to call out anyone as primary. Maybe all of them are doing the same job, same location, everything is same. That's why you put them in a position and that is grouped together in one position. So probably there isn't a need to call out a primary incumbent. But when you have multiple incumbents in a managerial position, then this functionality really helps out. So this is one of the fairly recent capabilities as well that is available out of the box now. Now, one thing that we always say when it comes to multiple incumbents is when you look at your headcount, if there are multiple people doing the same job in the same organization structure and everything about their job is exactly same, all the attributes maintained in a position are same, it is totally fine to have multiple people in one position. It actually helps you a lot when you have more than one person grouped in a position where any of your updates will have to be done only once and all the incumbents will be updated. So the lowest reporting hierarchy in your organization, individual contributors, if they can be grouped together into a position where all the attributes are same, then absolutely good to do so because it helps you with data maintenance, less data work. As you go higher up the chain, if a person has other people reporting to them, then always advisable to have a unique position for them because you don't want to group a managerial position unnecessarily. Where a managerial position can be grouped or it makes sense to group them is for a temporary purpose. Let's say if a manager or a director is going on a maternity leave, there is another person to temporarily do the job. You don't want to move the person out of the position when they are on leave. Leave them in the position, bring in your temporary person into the same position, just switch the primary incumbent of that position for the time the person is away. So you can, that's where it's more logical to do it. You can definitely have multiple people in a managerial position if it is for a temporary nature. If if it is a permanent situation where you have multiple managers in the same position, even though all their data attributes are same, keep them in separate position because you want to call out their reports to people who are reporting to them should have their unique reporting manager identified, right? So that's when you should not be ideally using that. And obviously, there is a position override functionality where you can put a person in a position and still override their job data directly. Absolutely a no-go for most situations. You only do that when there are some exception scenarios where you had to correct some data on employee job data for a temporary period, you use the position override. If you use position override as a standard practice, then you're basically nullifying a lot of benefits out of position management. An overridden incumbent will not be auto-updated. So meaning you have to update the position, you have to update the incumbent. So you're basically losing a lot of benefit out of position management if you're using position overrides quite heavily. Okay. So these are, I would say, some of the key items to consider and think about when we talk about position management in general. All right. Now, but let's spend some time on the implementation process, right? I'm assuming many of you in this session today are considering position management. Either you're using it partially for a small portion, but you want to think about rolling out more globally for all of your workforce, or you're not using position management at all, but you want to start using it, or maybe you're deployed it, using it, maybe not using it right. So for all of you, sort of this process at a high level applies, right? Uh, in terms of how to go about position management. And when it comes to a complete new PeopleSoft implementation, it's a lot more easier to do position management because to start with, we are setting them up to use positions. For organizations that do not use position management but are considering it now, the process is slightly different. There are various things to think about before we go and implement it, right? So that process is what is called out here. And it basically starts with capturing your current state process. And this is very important because ties into the next one. You want to capture the challenges and pain points in the current process. And the reason I say that is because when you discuss the current process associated with the headcount, starting with who requests a new headcount, how does it get a new headcount get approved, how is it currently requested, where they are requesting it, what information they are providing it, who does it go for approval to, is it all email based, or is it being done in a system somewhere else, what all happens before that position is advertised. And if you're not currently using position management, the first activity you are doing it in the system is basically hiring that person. That's when you are entering that headcount in your PeopleSoft HR system. But what all happens before that, right? That process is absolutely critical because that's what you're trying to replace with position management. The whole life cycle around defining or introducing a headcount and going through the approvals and advertising it, filling it, and finally hiring that person and putting in the HR system. All that process needs to be discussed. And the reason I call this out as an important first step is for those customers, some of them who wanted to do position management, and when we reviewed the current state process and pain points, we have many scenarios where position management wouldn't have done them a great good, right? Position management is not going to solve all their HR problems. Their issues were not related to what would be achieved via position management. Their issues were on other things. For example, a customer had issues maintaining their supervisor data accurately in job data. That was one of their pain points. Now, just because we do position management is not going to solve that, because if you can't maintain your supervisor data and job data, you most likely would not be able to maintain your reports to on position data. So the issue is going to pretty much continue, right? So knowing that whole process around how things are done now, how things will change when you introduce position management, and understanding that process change is critical to be successful with position management. So let me give you an example. For an organization that doesn't use position management, if all the upfront activities around defining a headcount is happening outside the system using paper-based process or manual processes, then position management provides a great option where you could get your managers to request positions, or you could get your HR business partners to request position, automate the workflow approvals in the system, get the position created automatically before it is used in recruitment module, or before you fill in the position on the job data. But if you're already doing those activities in your ATS, your recruiting system, then maybe you are actually trying to move some of that workload from your ATS into PeopleSoft, right? So that's why that current state and to-be state definition with and without position management is critical to understand what is the exact impact that position management is going to have. So assessing that, identifying that, and making sure you are getting full value out of implementing it is key before you even start implementation. And once you have done that, and if you think, okay, there are clear-cut benefits to doing position management, that you want to accurately report your headcounts, vacancies, approved budget, approved versus budgeted headcounts, all those things. You want to make sure you are able to track your position history, and you totally see these are the clear benefits we want to get, and this is how the process is going to look like with position management introduced. And when you decide to proceed, one of the first thing that we work with customers is data standardization, right? When you don't use position management, most likely your job data is not as standardized as it should be, right? What I mean by that is, going back to our analyst example, right? When you have multiple analysts in multiple department locations, the job titles could be all over the place. You might have the same role performed in same department, same location, but slightly different parameters. Their job title might be slightly different. I have instances with customers where they would call junior system analyst, they would call JR system analyst, they would call JR dot system analyst. All three are doing the same thing, right? Potentially they would be end up as one position, but right now there are three job records, right? Three employments. So cleaning up the job data is going to be key, because that's going to help with reducing the number of unique positions you need, right? That's going to be key to make sure the initial effort to create those positions is not so high, ongoing maintenance is not so high. Ideally, let's say if you end up with one position for every headcount, then it means you're probably not getting a lot of value with position management, right? Because instead of updating job data, you're going to be ending up updating position data, right? So an ideal ratio would be if you can bring down the number of positions around maybe around 3/4 or half to 3/4 of the headcount, then maybe great benefit, because you are now only needing to maintain roughly half the number of positions as many as headcounts you have, right? Not going to be possible for every organization, but doing that review and understanding what needs to happen to have a clean position management is key. So you do that pretty much before you start creating the positions in the system. Then you go ahead through the process of creating positions, converting your employee job data. Of course, when you use partial position management, this is absolutely critical. You can afford to only convert their current data, right? You don't have to worry about the history at all, because at any point in time, you could choose to have a new job data row and put a person in a position. You don't have to bother about their history. And the history was you didn't use position management and you maintained everything on job data. That's perfectly fine. If you opt for full position management, that is not possible. You have to convert their entire history, entire employment history to be position driven, which is a nightmare for most of the organization, because we wouldn't be able to go ahead and track all the positions history over a period of time. So that's where partial position management comes in handy. You are basically converting into position management as of a given date and move forward. Don't worry about the history of employment data. Of course, if there is an absolute need to have a position history as part of a conversion, then yeah, it makes sense to go through and do that activity. But it's going to be I would say a cumbersome activity for many organizations. If you have to start creating all that position history that happened over a time. Now, one of the biggest impact areas when you start doing position management new is going to be your reports, interfaces, and customizations. Reports and interfaces are key, and the two areas of impact that you need to think about is supervisor ID versus reports to field and action reason based reports, right? These are two things that are going to be impacted one way or another, and we just need to understand how big an impact that is before you go ahead and do the implementation, right? So the first is pretty straightforward. Any report or an interface that is looking for supervisor ID on job data, and wherever you are sending any information to third-party systems about the supervisor, org structure, etc., that should now start looking at the reports to field on position data rather than supervisor ID field on job data. So basically a change in how you get that information, how you get the reporting hierarchy is going to change, and any reports and interface that relies on that information will need to change. Most likely, every customer would have at least a handful of reports and interfaces that is using that information. So that's the first item that you need to do an impact analysis to understand how much technical work would be needed. Right. The second is customizations, and the customizations, where the customizations get impacted is any customizations typically on job data. If you have any customization job data, then the update incumbent process may need to be reviewed to make sure it will work in your environment. As long as the customizations are not too intrusive, like you haven't completely rewritten your job data, then you should be fine. If it is minor things here and there, additional fields, etc., those are easily manageable customizations, right? You can easily isolate them and make it work with position. So that's the analysis that's going to define. And in some cases of where we did position management rollouts, that reports, interfaces, customizations were the longest items where a customer had to spend time working and updating them before they can go live with position management. So In some cases, if you're using very standard system functionalities, it may not be a huge impact, but for some customer, there's a big impact around all those areas, right? So that would be the overall implementation process that you need to go through to start deploying position management. As one of the very good things about position management is you can do it in a phased way. You can choose one portion of the organization, just do it for that portion and stagger your rollouts. The whole application, PeopleSoft HR module and all the other modules are built to handle partial position management, meaning you could have workforce, a portion of them in positions, a portion of them without position. So there is no additional work needed to have a phased rollout. It's part of, that's definitely an option you can try, especially for larger organizations and organization across different regions, countries, etc. You would want to roll out in a phased way. Okay, so that's with the implementation process, and I think I took a little bit of more time on that one. In terms of best practices, I think I already covered most of these items. Choosing partial position management, reducing the number of unique positions, clean up action reasons. This is important because typically the item that gets impacted is when we talk about action reason list is, if you're not using position management, most of your job data updates will be grouped under this action called DTA, data change, and you have numerous action reasons within them for changing the different data elements. Most of those changes that happen with DTA will move to a new action called POS, position update, that will come from the position management, because most of the changes will now going forward will happen in position data, changing reports to changing your full-time, part-time, rec tempo, all those things will be done in position. So your DTA is going to happen as POS. That's the biggest change. So reports that are relying on that action reasons will need updates as well. Okay. And one other item I haven't called out so far is the guided self-service, right? So if you're not using guided self-service for managers already, to submit this personal action requests like reporting change, location change, department change, it's good to consider rolling that out along with position management, because you would want to reduce the load on your admin team and focus on distributing the load to your managers as well. It's the right time to do it. If you're already using guided self-service, that framework is built to handle position management. So the way the requests are submitted will change for from some requests, but it's already built to handle it. A good example is, let's say you want to promote an employee. If you're not using position management, a manager will say, see, these are the employee's current attributes. He's working in this job code, department, location. What is that you want to change? A manager will enter that information and submit it. However, if you're doing position management and you want to submit a promotion, the manager can only move that person from one position to another position, meaning the position to which the employee is getting promoted to should exist in the system already. So they first need to request for a target position before they are promoting that employee into that position, right? So the manner you do it will change, but that whole guided self-service framework is built to handle position management. So it works with and without position management, okay? I see there is a question that has come through. Does position management impact how earnings distribution is tracked? Not at all. So there is pretty much zero impact to earnings distribution functionality. You would still track it directly on job data, and position management doesn't do any changes to that. Okay. All right. I had a portion here where I wanted to do the online demo, but let me check if there is anything else. No. All right. Now we don't have a great deal of time for demo. I'll bring up the system and I'll show some few highlights of it. But feel free to send through any other questions. I'm monitoring both the sections, the Zoom chat window over here, and the Pathable app as well. Also, if you have any questions that you would want to talk about, please raise your hand as well. I can unmute you so that you can ask a question as well. All right, meanwhile, I'll just bring this system up. All right, so I don't see any other question coming up. So let's proceed with the demo aspect, right? So when it comes to position management, let me go and what and position management. So again, when it comes to the classic position management, the page is very similar to the job code page that you're already familiar with, right? So not a great deal of information that I want to show in that space. So what I wanted to focus on is quickly show an example around fluid position management, right? So when we talk about fluid position management, it is still an admin functionality, but opened up to a broader audience in your organizations. Any of your HR admins, HR business partners could be a person requesting new position. Or as I said, there are examples where we have rolled out position management functionality to managers. So even your managers can come in here and request positions, right? Um, so let me get a quick example in here. Just give me one second. All right. I think I'm missing my document in here. Just give me one second. All right. Let me go ahead and create a new position anyways. So a position creation process has been converted into a guided process. That was one of the big changes with the Fluid user interface. So when I'm requesting a new position, just like employee ID, I can either provide an ID here if I know it, or I will let the system automatically generates its own. It starts with an effective date and an effective sequence and what's the reason. There's a basically default reason of new. And from that point onwards, it's a guided process to go ahead and create a position. And if you notice in here, there is some basic information about the position itself. When I'm requesting it, if you are capturing budgetary information in PeopleSoft, we could call it out as a proposed position or a position. We wouldn't definitely create a position for a frozen budget, or it's an approved budgetary position, right? So you could do that, call out that you are trying to fill 4 headcounts in this position, when you want it active by. There are various elements in the position that can be used for different reporting purposes. Whether a position is a key position, it is used in the succession planning module. But there are other things like whether a job sharing is permitted, available for telework, whether it's budgeted or confidential questions. We have customers use these fields on for various purposes, right? I have a customer who called this job sharing permitted to be something like, is it an associate position or is it an intern position, things like that. These fields do not drive any business process on their own. So you could actually make use of this field in any different form or way you wanted to. Okay. There is a question about, can you repeat the timeline for classic question management will no longer be supported? It is December 2021. So end of this year is the timeline for end of support for classic question management. Okay. So it's in the Oracle support document. There is sort of not a roadmap, but sort of dates for every year, at the end of every year, what functionality is going out of support. So that document has this information about what's ending support in this year. Okay. All right. Then the key information is job code, right? A position starts with a job code. We just discussed it. All right. I think I'm logged in as a wrong person to be creating a position. So let me log out. But since we are running out of time as well, I want to make sure we address any open questions that are there. All right, let me go to question management. Let me also on the site check if there are any other questions that are coming through. Nothing so far. So let me continue with the process of creating a new position. Go with all the default values and pick up a job code. So let's say I pick up a financial analyst job code. Attributes of the job code get defaulted to a position right away. So all the information like the title, regular, temporary, full-time, part-time, the short title, description, all those come through. If you're using unions and bargaining units, you can select that information in the position level, so you maintain it there. But the key information here is the org data, right? Where does this position work? Let's say the financial analyst is in accounts payable department, and that defaults the location and company details. I can choose who does this position reports to. This is key to basically call out. Basically, we are putting that position in the org structure here. We are saying that this financial analyst now is going to report to finance manager. You can see who are the incumbents in that position. There is Arthur Erickson, who is the incumbent, so that's the person who this would be reporting to. This is the dotted line functionality I mentioned about earlier. Okay, person will be reporting to the auditor. One other thing I did not mention earlier is the salary plan grade information. So there is a flexibility in position management to maintain the salary plan grade either at a position level or at employee job level. So pretty much this is the only element that customers can choose to maintain it where, right? Other elements like department location, reports to will have to be maintained in the position data. But when it comes to your salary plan grade information, you can choose to maintain it in position or at job data. So you can leave it blank here and you can edit it on job data directly, or you can maintain it here and not edit it on job data. It's entirely up to the customers to decide where they want to maintain it. Where it would come in handy is, let's say, especially grade, let's say you have multiple people where all the attributes are same, but they are in different salary grades. If you don't want to create multiple positions with different salary grades, you could create one position and maintain the grade on the job data. So it will help you keeping the number of positions down. So that's where it comes in very handy. So that's the basic information that I have in here. There is additional information that can be added. There's a lot more info that can be captured at a country level as well. Due to the lack of time, I'll try to fast forward this information. Position budgeting is another key feature with position management. There is a basic level budgeting functionality available in PeopleSoft where there is ability to track budgets either at department level or position level. If you choose position level budgeting, you could use this information. You can attach a position to a position pool. You can define when the position should start encumbrance, and that information can be fed over to your finance system as well. It's just giving you what are the possibilities here. Attachments are optional. This is where we control whether the position should update the incumbents, whether should it include salary plan and grade as part of the updates, whether we want to change force updates for title changes. So this is when you change title, should it update the incumbents is an option that you can choose as well. So just submit it. So this position now goes through the approval before it gets created on the back end. Of course, I think when it comes to how a position is submitted and created, there is not a lot of features and functionality to demo. That's why I wanted to keep this portion very simple and focus entirely on discussing the purpose and benefits and the process of implementing position management. So we are finally running out of time now. There's another minute or so. Let me quickly check if there are any further questions. Let's see. I have one more question. Does using position and require use of the org chart? We have large position. We do not have supervisor. No. So does using position management require use of org chart? No, you don't have to. We have a large portion of the organization who do not have supervisor or report structures. So yeah, not necessary at all. The drawback I see when you do not have when you have large portion of organization without reporting structure is you can't use many of the manager self-service functions, right? Because a manager self-service is the function that relies on the reporting structure, who reports to whom and who they have control over, etc. If you're not using manager self-service, then if you don't have a a well cut out report to structure, then there is no impact. You can, just like your job data, you can have position data without reports to, or you can have what we call as a dummy reports to. Many position can report to one position, right? So no impact at all. You can still continue the current structure. Yeah. All right. I think that we are over by a minute, but my contact details is part of the slide deck that's attached to the session. So if you have any further questions or need more in-depth discussion, feel free to reach out. And with that, I'll stop sharing. And thank you, all of you, and hope all of you have a great rest of the conference. Bye-bye.